Hello, everybody. Hello, hello, hello. Hopefully, you all can hear me. My name is Spencer Campbell. We're here for another Nova Final Week festivities event. I am here joined by the spectacular, the bouncy, the excited Jeremy Gage. I'll talk about what we're going to talk about here in just a second, but Jeremy has taught me the right way of doing things with guests, which is allow them to introduce themselves and do their plugs ahead of time, which I always wait till the end. So Jeremy, who are you? Throw your plugs out right away. Let's get you on the page here.
Hello, everyone. I hope that you can hear me. My name is Jeremy Gage. I am the host of the Draw Your Dice podcast. You can find me on your favorite podcast distributor. I'm also co host on the Tabletop Call-In Show with Adam Bell, who you may or may not know. And if you don't, you should, because he's a great guy. And yeah, you can chat with me at Jeremy Gage5 over on Twitter. Back to you, Spencer.
That was really good. That's a hard voice to follow. Hopefully Jeremy came through there clear because
Yeah.
I don't, I don't want to have
What a
have him do
risk.
that again. We had some tech issues last time, but I think I figured them out this time. Wonderful, wonderful. I'm super excited. I was actually thinking back, Jeremy, to when we first met each other, so to speak, or like what our first interactions were. And I think it was during the Slayers campaign last
Mm-hmm.
year. You had been reaching out to me. So that means we've been in communication in some form for about a year now. But it has been maybe just in the last 6 months or so that we've really started to interact and get into our like cool chats and everything. So I'm so excited to talk to you and to talk about what you've been cooking up and why you've been brought into to Nova. So let me set the stage here for a second. For those of you who are watching along, this is a Nova chat where today Jeremy has been brought on because of the way that he thinks about GM tools and adversaries and mission structures and just the cool content that you can add to the toolkit of a rulebook that makes it exciting for the GM, which I think is really really cool. And that is a an area admittedly that I struggle with. I have little to no fun putting together like tables for things, stat blocks for enemies, and everything like that. And as somebody who's creating a game that requires missions and enemies for you to fight on said missions, I don't find myself the best equipped to take on this task. And I had been writing this stuff before. I basically repurposed the mission generator that I had used from Frame into Nova, and it was what I would say acceptable. It was passable. But I don't think it did a good job of thank you. I don't think it did a good job of capturing what I was interested in with Nova, which is this premise of you're these badass sparks going out into an incredibly dangerous place, the Dusk, and going into these ruins and going on exciting missions and everything like that. And right at in the rules as written right now with my version, that's just not being captured. So I sat down with Jeremy like a week and a half ago, maybe 2 weeks, something like that,
Thursday or something like that.
relatively recently,
Mm-hmm.
um, with the idea of having him build some adversaries at first. That was the initial like proposal. Was like, hey, can you like I hate making enemy stat blocks. Can you do this for me? And Jeremy, of course, is like, yeah, of course, I could do this. We can work on this. And then I, of course, came to our meeting and said, hey, let me throw you a huge curveball. And we went from there. So, um, Jeremy, rather than me sort of like ranting and rambling my way through this, what are like I've kind of given you the reins to have some fun with like building GM tools and content for Nova. And so I'm just curious, like, first of all, just like broadly speaking, what are some of the things that you're working on? And then we can kind of like dive deeper into some of those things as we talk about them.
Sure, sure. I outstretched my hand because I wanted to help with the project. It's getting so much amazing buzz, and I know that at one point Spencer had said like, oh, I'm just having a hard time coming up with like this thing. Like, oh, okay. If you want some help writing some stuff, because I know you're managing the Kickstarter and the publicity for it, you're also managing all the collaboration. You're basically at this point project manager for the whole kit and caboodle. So lift all ships in a way. And yeah, so what we kind of talked about working on was game master tools, facilitator rules, or principles or philosophies that could help you better execute the game. That is Spark, or excuse me, that is Nova. Spark, frame, Nova, more.
It's all the same
It's all the
eventually.
same juice. So I will be helping write adversaries for the game in terms of different factions that you might interact with. I will be also helping with ruin generation, so basically the places in which missions take place. And then I will also be helping with just like mission prompts to help, excuse me, wrap to help the game master wrap their head around creation for that mode of play, so that you're not just sort of creating whole cloth. Because admittedly, I am not one of those people who are super excellent at creating from whole cloth. And as far as I know of the human psyche, we're better at combining things and making things up. So if I can provide a couple prompts for people to story tell with, such as little lore tidbits about the adversaries, or uh, helping you roll for like description tables of the places that you're in or the architecture that you see, just sort of streamlining the GM experience. Because at the end of the day, the GM is also a player, and they need fun toys to play with as well. They're not just there to play referee when it comes to the fiction. At the end of the day, this is a game, not a improv session.
I think that that last part is the when you were talking to me about that, and as you were describing some of the ways that you foresaw like building things for Nova, the GM being a player and like giving them tools so that they can play and in that play have fun. I was like, "Oh, okay. Jeremy gets it. I This is perfect." Because I'm also one of those people that I don't fully prep missions when I don't prep anything anymore. I'm very low prep compared to like if you had talked to me 5 years ago, it would be a totally different thing. Um, I would have had everything statted out and everything, but I think it's because I've become so low prep that like the idea of putting together 20 stat blocks for enemies or something like that for the rulebook is like against the core of how I play the game. Like if you look at any of the prep that I've done for the Nova actual plays, it truly is just like they go here and then they fight some beasts. And I'm like, well, I'll figure out what those beasts are when we get there. But so I'm excited about these things that you've got here. These sort of like the three-prong approach where you've got the sort of adversaries that we're dealing with, the ruins or the locales in which said adversaries might be um, living or dwelling in so
Mm-hmm.
that they are dealt with, and then some cool or some some interesting little lore bits and little levers or something like that, or even just some questions for the GM to answer to help prompt them for like, okay, I know how this is all being woven together without it being overly prescriptive, which I think is very
Mm.
cool.
Yeah,
um
ultimately, my attempt is to give the what, where, and why of the whole thing.
I think that's awesome. I think that's super cool. With those answering those three questions, like you're good to go, you're ready to roll, and I think it also still strongly fits the mission statement of Lumen Games and Nova, which is like fast rules light sort of stuff. So we're not dipping into the realm of like here's the CR values for all of
Yeah,
the
yeah.
enemies or anything like that. Like it's just we're still in that space of here's some cool tools that you can use, but now it's not tools necessarily so that the players are facing a balanced experience or anything like that, but it's that the GM can have fun, which I think
Mm-hmm.
is so important. Um, so I want to talk about these sorts of things, and I guess what's the where would you like to start? You want to start talking about like adversaries and factions? You want to talk about these ruins and how they're being generated? Probably makes sense to start with one of those rather than like how they're woven together.
Yeah, so the meat of what I have written so far is adversary focused first. Um, did have some like light prompting words for myself when I start to create like features or dangers for particular ruins. Um, and I also have like loose stuff for mission generation. Mission generate, I'll go with the two lighter ones because I don't know if I'll have a ton to give from my document, but there might be good things to like that we can have a conversation about. And then the adversaries will probably take up a good chunk because those are sort of the what I've mostly written, and they sort of have the most crunch in a way to
Mm-hmm.
everything else that's being generated. Everything else is very fictional or narrative. So first with mission generation, which is currently in its lightest step of design, we had spoken kind of briefly about it, in that the inspiration that we both kind of came to a conclusion to was Band of Blades. If anyone has played the Forge in the Dark game Band of Blades by Strauss Asimovic and John LaBeouf Little, um, or LaBouffe. I'm sorry if I mispronounced those if they're listening to this, or if they listen in the future. But Band of Blades mission structure, or at least the way that it generates missions, is supposed to be very fast and furious in like the moment that it's happening. Me and Spencer have talked about how the GM role might be also an in-world narrative player in terms of comparing it to the Lotus from Warframe or Cortana in Halo, how this sort of NPC pops up in your visor or in your earpiece and just sort of guides you through what's going on. You know, I'm picking up heat signatures. I am detecting life signs ahead of you. You're getting closer to the sun shard. Things of those elements could be presented in a narrative way. And so right now I have in Spencer's original document, sneak peek at original document. Maybe is this NDA'd?
No, you can say whatever you
Okay,
want.
okay. I just want to make sure. Uh, so you had 6 different mission types in
Mhm.
there, and what I basically did is I took those 6 mission types, which are all great mission types. You even had kind of subcategories within them, but I thought they could be distilled to a little bit lighter of a base. And so there are 4 mission types. I currently have assault, recon, supply, and support. Assault is the idea that you are attempting to remove, eliminate, capture. You're going after a someone or a something specific that is living. So a creature, a member of the lunar cult, potentially whatever happens to be in that area. You can roll that up on the table. Some of them some roles allow you to pick but enhance the danger. So for instance, I believe I have 4 factions that we'll get into later. And you'll roll a d6. Like if you're like, okay, I want to see which mission type this is, or mission types if you're making more than one at a time, and presenting all of those options to the players, you'd roll, I think, like the first 4 results on the d6 are the factions, and the last 2 are an elite. So you have to do it. You're going to be going somewhere for a boss fight, and then the last one is pick from the above, but increase the threat of the opponent somehow. And you can the GM's prerogative is to increase that however they see fit, based on their particular table's playstyle. So there are those 4 types. They all have their subtypes. You'll basically roll for those. So that's what I've got going on there. Additionally, I also am playing with a difficulty roll table. So me and Spencer had talked about like what if there are ranks to ruins, or like what makes one ruin more dangerous than another ruin. And we got into the subject of talking about Magic the Gathering a little bit, and how when I play as a GM, when I build a location, I imagine it like a deck of Magic cards, and how I'm trying to get the most I can out of 60 cards. Or if I'm playing in a different format, that 100 card singleton or that 100 card commander deck, um, or EDH also as it's known. And so what I'm playing with is that there's a D6 table that has 3 options, and they have health totals on them. So the creatures or adversaries in Nova have lower health totals than you're used to, probably more trad games, anywhere from like 1 to a maximum of like 10, depending on the elite or not. So in the difficulty set, I have presented you with this rune can only contain a total of 50 health. This rune can only contain a total of 75 health, or this rune can contain a total of 75 health plus an elite at the end. And those are sort of gauges for you. You don't have to follow those. Again, these are all like breakable by nature of Nova, but it might be a good way to help newer GMs to say like, oh, how many enemies should be present here? Like, what is too tough of a battle for these frames? And I know that or excuse me, Sparks. Sorry, copywritten. don't DMCA us, please. But it is a way to gauge difficulty, and you can use that narratively as like, we detect a large heat signature there in the form of an elite. We are seeing we've gotten communication from Voyager units to that there's been big mobilization towards a particular ruin or something of that nature. So that's sort of the mission stuff, is difficulty and mission type. Do you
Yeah.
want to touch on any of that?
Yeah, just to sort of like think out loud, like you said in the beginning, we were talking about the idea of having somebody like in your head that the GM could embody. And you mentioned it right there at the end. That was something that we had talked about, is like the Voyager reports are these like ongoing reports that are like being collected about the Dusk. And so it doesn't even necessarily have to be like a person that you're talking to, but like the GM can always embody the concept of the Voyager reports that are being used to like brief the Sparks before they go on their missions, and so they can always like update where they're going. There's a lot of different ways that the GM can play with this, and that was another thing that you mentioned that I think is really important to note here, which I think is really cool, is that these tools are not they're not obligatory like many things in Lumen. You're strapping on what you want to strap on. That's very much how Light was designed, for example. So Light is designed to be as modularly complex as you want it to be. So I like this idea of you presenting a toolkit that the GM can use to build and play around with, rather than this is the tool that you must use,
Yeah.
wield it. And I just want to reemphasize again how much I love your analogy of building a deck, a magic deck, because I know that's something that you use, or you were talking about when we were first imagining like some of the ruin types and everything like that. I think that is the coolest analogy in the world for a GM kind of coming up with their prep for a mission or something like that. Is what is the analogous Magic the Gathering deck? What would one expect to face there? What are some of the
Mm-hmm.
obstacles? And just having that as a framework to just kind of be thinking about the whole time. Like, what is a blue deck? Like, what is a
Mm-hmm.
ruin of blue going to look like and feel like compared to a red ruin? And I know that we've talked about this a little bit. I just think that is the coolest analogy in the world. I think I just want to reemphasize how awesome I think that is as a way of thinking about things. Um, so I love this. You've got these really cool toolkits and everything like that that you've been tinkering with, these interesting tables. The blades, or not blades in the dark, the Band of Blade stuff. That's something that I think you and I are both big fans of Band of Blade. So like
Mm-hmm.
it only like when we were both talking about it before, we're like, yeah, this is it. This is the thing that we love so much. So I think this is really cool. And then one last thing that is popped into my mind is, you talked about this idea of introducing difficulty or like bands of difficulty to a mission, and how can that be done. And I think that's really important to provide those sorts of tools for GMs who want to play with it, because it's something that has been mentioned a lot as I just talk about the game in various places, but also it's in the book that the further you go into the dusk, the stranger and more dangerous things are. And so
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
now you are providing at least some guidance or some tools that the GM can say like, "Oh, this mission is like deep out there." So
Yeah.
like it's gonna be gnarly. You're gonna run into these elites, or you're gonna run into like a much more robust ruin or whatever it is that you're going to, as opposed to, oh, we're just going near like the border of the dust to take care of some some raiders that have been harassing us, that sort of thing. So I
Mm-hmm.
love that that toolkit, or that tool is being added to the toolkit, because I think it leans well into a major premise of the dusk.
Well, good. I'm glad that the guy in charge is happy with it. So I'm glad to keep continuing to work on it. Speaking of which, for Ruin Generation being the next subject here, one of the inspirations I have from it currently is Iron Sworn, specifically the Delve supplement that was created, I think, a year ago now at this point, um, by Sean Tompkins. Whew. And basically, what Ironsworn Delve provides to the game is it allows for rollable place location generation based on two things: a theme and a domain. So there's a list of domains within the book, things like a mountain pass or the tangle of a forest or wood, or a sea cavern. These are all very centric around the Ironlands, which is the setting for Ironsworn. And then themes like ancient or corrupted or ravaged that are layered on top of those. So you get all these combinations of themes and domains that go into the couple dozens, I believe, if my math is correct. But so you could go to like, what does a corrupted sea cavern feel like differently than an ancient sea cavern? What does a infested tangle versus an infested stronghold? What's different about those two things? And then they have some tables that provide you with like features or dangers that you would use specifically for the game. So I took these elements and I made 2d6 tables for them currently. I don't know if I'm married to every one of these right now, but what I have, and then I also, as a third layer, just so I could be a little bit more different than Delve, because you kind of hit the nail on the head when you talked about the further out you leave from a sunwell or a sun shard space, the more dangerous and murky the dusk becomes. So there are 3 zones that I've written down. There's the Crimson, which is anything that's near a sunwell or a city. When you talk about the dusk, I imagine almost this constant like twilight or horizon golden light, and it's like this purple haze that kind of like drifts around the ground. And near a city, it's lit up by the sunwell. The sunwell is providing some form of light. These are shards of the sun. And I imagine these beams that are like coming out of the Earth's core all over the place, even some beams that are coming out of the now shattered moon. So that's why the Crimson is called the Crimson. It's these orange and reds and pinks that kind of that are colored by the golden light of the sun shards and influence the dusk, and makes it easier for you to meander around. Then the next zone would be the dusk. That's further out from any sun well or sun shard. This includes any sun shards you might find in a crater out in the wild. And then the last zone I have is the umbral, which is pitch. It's dark, it's far away, or it's underground. I think one thing that wasn't explored yet in the lore is like, what does the underground of this second Earth look like, right? What are the caverns and things, and how is that influenced by these large impacted, radioactive in some forms, sun shards? So the Umbral is this terrible, like almost eldritch mystery place. And then for the themes and architectures, I'm calling the domains in this one, the themes are pale. So this space is influenced by lunar stones. Fortified, which means it's occupied by some immense organization, raiders, corvid, lunar cultists, or even other maybe like rogue sparks or another settlement or something like that. There's infested, where creatures have made this place their home. Ravaged, where this place is sort of like ruined and there's almost nothing left. Ablaze, this place has a sun shard within it somewhere, and so this like light fills up the space. Because the other thing I imagined for the lore of Nova is that if they're lunar cultists, why are they not solar cultists? Like, why isn't there a religion placed around the sun shards as well? So I feel this is some sort of like sanctified or holy sort of site. And then the last one is warped, where the dusk has sort of like seeped and permeated the very reality of this space. It's so condensed. And this might be like an umbral space or something like that. And the architecture is factory machinery that's like long rusted. It creaks and it groans, and that's sort of like the structure of the ruin you're going to. Metropolis, which is a reminder of a lost era. There's an old well, which is where a sun shard has been extracted from already. But there's no reason you can't explore those things. Or what if a lunar cultist or a lunar cult sect has made a new stronghold there? Maybe there's another sun shard even deeper down in that crater. There's a stronghold, which is basically first generation settlements. So when we first arose from the underground after the apocalypse, the Armageddon that came to the planet, there had to have been failings of some sort. So those things exist. There's the Tangle, which is the wild overgrowth of the world. And then there's Valley, which accounts for like mountains and stuff. There might be one for like seas, but that's essentially Ruin Generation in a nutshell. It'll provide some like, you can roll some like D36 tables for different features or potential environmental dangers that place can use or help you influence the narrative.
I think this is super cool. I want to highlight a couple of things. So Eddie York is watching us right now.
Hi, Eddie.
Those of you who hopefully got the chance to see Eddie and I talk yesterday.
The devil frame rips. It's so good.
It's so good. It has to happen. Um, Eddie mentioned a couple things that are really interesting and cool here. First of all, just that the systems that you're describing are really one of the reasons that I like them so much, and Eddie has kind of brought this sentiment to words here, is that it promotes future scope. It doesn't limit the scope of what can be done in the game. It allows people again to lean into that modularity of like what do they want to what do they want to incorporate. It allows us to come up with more of these sorts of situations that you've been describing. These tables can be supplemented or people can come up with their own sort of stuff, especially with like I always love to run a jam with my games. So like a Nova jam where people take a lot of these toolkits that you've got here and tinker with them. Maybe somebody's got is like obsessed with the Umbral idea because I'm obsessed with the Umbral idea now that you've mentioned it, and they've got some really cool stuff, ideas to go with that. And also Eddie mentions, and you mentioned it too, and I can't believe I truly never did think about the idea of like a solar cultist. I was like, no, the solar stuff is the stuff that we just like, and then the cultists are the moon people. But yeah, absolutely. Like, why wouldn't there be solar cultists and what as well? And um, Eddie was mentioning like in his head he sees like these solar cultists as worship them as like objects of power, right? Because they're these huge, fiery, powerful things, and maybe the lunar cultists have a different perspective on how they see things like lunar shards. So
Yeah.
I think again, once again, these are cool toolkits that are incredibly flexible. First of all, they provide a wide variety of things that people can do, which is very, very cool. But then on top of that, they're very flexible in terms of how the GM wants to, like, what they want to adopt from them, how much they want to lean into it. When you were describing the Crimson, I was like, this is exactly how I see the Dusk in my head. So I'm glad that we're like thinking this, we're on the same wavelength without even like needing to like go through that whole like, all right, so what exactly is the dusk? Because I don't think there's necessarily like a nailed down version of what the dusk is. Um, so is this when you were coming up with some of these these areas, looking at Ironsworn obviously was a big inspiration. Is this also where you see some of like your Magic the Gathering deck building stuff kind of coming in as an influence?
A little bit, yeah. So it's mostly around the themes, particularly
Mm,
in terms of like what does a black deck feel like? What does a white deck feel like? What does a green deck feel like, right? Green is the infested, big creatures. Everything has made its home here, and they're all like vying for territory. You got some angry territorial beasts roaming around here, right? The pale is sort of your almost like artifact deck in a way,
Hmm.
at least as I see it for the lunar cultist. Like the pale is very like lunar cultist. In fact, the tagline I have for it is lunar hymns echo throughout. And like that's what you would kind of tack on to that thing. So there's like scrawlings. It's very like I don't know who's watching or if you've played Darkest Dungeon, but it reminds
Mm.
me of the symbology or cultists and sort of like the initial ruins, the first sort of like playthrough of the game, where they're wearing like iconography. You can find iconography on the walls, just like these ancient scripts. So it has a little bit of like an eldritch energy to it. And then something like Ravage is very like red focused. It's like the Raiders faction has been here or something to that effect. So yeah, there's a little bit of colorings of like some of these themes have the potential to be attached to particular factions in the adversary section, but again, that's not an obligation, right? In a blazed metropolis, right, that has a sun chart in it, you could still have beasts there, and maybe, and we'll talk about this, but maybe there's a variant of some beasts that have been influenced by the sun shard's energy, right? My thing, the biggest pillar I see for the lore or the future of Nova or the setting is whatever the sparks are, because whatever amalgamation form the spark takes, the devil spark, the sunslinger, pyre, grim, like that idea had to come from somewhere, and if it didn't, that idea has to influence something else, right? Because there aren't just animals that are out there in the dusk, there are people out there in the dusk. The raiders are taking note of the weaponry that the sparks are using, and why wouldn't they either? Because there's also, the sparks are not unique. Also, there are multiple potential devil sparks, there are multiple pyre sparks, there are multiple voyager sparks, right? Not all those sparks are going to stay alive, they're not always going to survive the dangers of the wild. So there has to be technological influence on both the player side, but all, and this is not to strip away what makes the players cool. What I am more alluding to is how does the opposition A know what they're up against and make themselves more dangerous, more of a tangible threat in the setting, and how do they manipulate it for their purposes? I don't see the Raiders putting on spark suits. That's just not their thing. But they're sure as hell gonna take Grimm's fucking fencing necromancer sabers, use that shit somehow, and start bringing up their buddies. Like, there's no reason they wouldn't want to do that. And so that's what I think about when I think about all these world pieces. Is like, for every additional piece someone else makes up, you have to ask the question, what then, or what was, like what led to this, or what will become of this, because it's going to have an impact somehow, especially with something as demigod like as the sparks.
I hope you all are just heard all of that and understand 100% why I brought Jeremy onto this project, because I absolutely love the way that you think about games, and just I think it's a big part has to do with how you think about story, because I know that's an important thing to you. I know that's something that you've been wanting to tinker with, is um, in general outside of Nova, just like the concept of how we tell stories in our role-playing games and stuff like that. And so I think that stuff bleeds into your design here, and that's incredibly cool to me, because I don't think about things at that degree or at that level. I'm out here. I just played some Destiny for like 2 hours before this, so like I've got in my mind like, all right, how do I make like a really cool mission and then like move on to the next thing? And I don't stop and think about, you know, how would the enemies how are the enemies in Destiny responding to the fact that they are literally fighting immortal guardians? Like what are they doing about it? And if I stopped and thought about it, there is some answers to it, but I don't think about that. So that's why I'm so appreciative and I love the stuff that
Mhm.
you're bringing to the table because you are thinking about that sort of stuff and then it becomes manifest in these things that you are building for the game. It's just very. So again, I'm here to gush, Jeremy. I'm here to gush a lot of the time. Uh, so I'm
I think, thank you. I appreciate it.
good, good, excellent, good.
Um, sorry, I want to get this out of the way, not to blow the momentum, but this episode will eventually be sponsored by AT&T because there's a storm. It's been ripping hot all day, and it's finally evaporated everything into a storm that's happening. So if I'm cutting out viewers and Spencer, AT&T is just saying hello.
Oh, good. They're testing out their new connection with you. They're gonna get you all hooked up. It's all our new sponsor. That and LaCroix, as
Yeah,
you
yeah.
and I are both drinking literally the exact same thing. um, excellent. So,
This episode is brought to you by LaCroix and AT&T.
boy, I'll take it. I'll take it. Um, we we've sort of set the stage here in terms of like where some of these places that the sparks are to go into. They now have reasons why we're starting to understand why they're going out there. We're starting to understand how the world is woven together at a little bit more than me just saying like the further out you go the stranger it is without like necessarily diving into what I mean by that. So we're starting to see some of that. We're seeing these cool locations, and I think then like I think it's time to talk about some of these adversaries that you've been thinking about here, especially in the space of factions and stuff like that. Because you name dropped some of them, and I of course got very excited. So the way you are thinking about enemies, I think, is amazing, and from our previous conversation, it is in some ways inspired by games like Halo, right? In terms of like how you're thinking about enemies as like almost like team compositions and how enemies play differently when they're around one another. So you've got almost like this enemy AI thing that you're thinking about here while also thinking about these cool factions. And those things are obviously linked up. So like where should we dive in first? Do you want to talk about factions or just sort of like how you've been composing adversaries?
Yeah, I'll start at like a top down and I'll sort of like get deeper and deeper in like what I'm playing with. And this is all pending change per Spencer's approval. Um, but so at the topmost level, I'm currently working with 4 factions because those are the 4 factions that you had presented in your document. And I thought I don't really want to reinvent the wheel here. I don't feel like that's necessary. Well, you had 3 factions, then I added the planet's animals as a faction. So there are the raiders, which live out in dusk settlements. They're not scared to be out there and like do whatever they want with the nature that's out there and whoever seems to pass. That kind of like a mercenaries for hire. The kind of like inspiration space for that are sort of the first enemies you encounter in any Borderlands games, sort of the wild villager people who just sort of repurpose tech for their own needs and kind of live a nomadic lifestyle. So that's one. And then the next ones are the Corvid, which is an alien race that you had in the book, which I haven't really had an opportunity to really get into the nitty gritty for adversaries for them yet. They're my last project, but the direction that I'm sort of going for them is very like almost illusionist, holograms, very like tech based ninjas slash caster sort of energy. And really, I'm just ripping from Corvid Court and bringing up the technology a lot. Basically, a homage to a past Gila RPG game. Then, of course, the famous lunar cultists, they have to be present at least in this first edition, which I like what Eddie said about kind of the future scope of the game, because with these, there's only a few factions. You could make more factions. You could create more factions if you want to. New aliens, different types of raiders. Maybe you create a like rogue spark manufacturer faction or something like that. Those are all your ideas to have out there, creators. I've already got my 4. And then the last one are the Haze Dwellers, which are for the dusk, and they're the megafauna or creatures that sort of meander about the space. And the inspiration there is sort of a combination of creatures that you might see in like the Patagonian cloud forest and like the mountains. Because I was trying to think of places where there is actual haze and what does that humidity look like and what kind of creatures live there. So it's things like snakes and lizards and toads, moths, different types of sloths and deers, just something like different from like your bears or your wolves or your dragons or something like that. I don't know if there'll be like any mythical style creatures in here. There are very like, I would call them sci-fi based creatures where they're like creature splices, very chimeric types of energy here, or almost, what do I want to say? Evolutionary states. Like one of the haze dwellers is the glitter moth, which is this giant Mothra kind of thing that floats over tangles and forests, and its scales are have different variant abilities, which I'll get into in a few moments. But yeah, I'll kind of run into what I'm sort of conceptualizing. So mechanically, adversaries have 2 stats ultimately. They have their harm and their health. What other sort of game inspirations have a 2 mechanical stat thing? Generally, playing cards. Magic the Gathering, Yu-Gi-Oh, Runeterra, Legends of Runeterra. They all have a power and a toughness. And so that's how I'm sort of like, I know we talked earlier about how like this isn't really a game that cares about balance, and it shouldn't be. I'm not saying that it should be, but for me, it helps me articulate the difference between like what is a sort of support style enemy versus what is like an aggressive high damage enemy, right? So in the Raiders section, one example I have, and I'm not going to try to screen share this because I don't want it to goof up your stream. So I'm just going to read some stuff off. So for one instance, excuse me, before I even get into that, another thing that I'm playing with, there's the health and the harms. They have their moves, which I don't know if you shared moves. I think there are some adversaries in the quick start for Nova, if anyone's been looking at those. You provide like 3 like narrative moves that kind of describe or tactics that help describe what this creature or adversary does, or the way it deals harm. So I have those, but the additional thing that I'm adding to these, and elites are different. We'll get to elites in a few moments, but there are enemies. So this is taking essentially from Halo and how there are gold elites and red elites and how there are sledgehammer brutes and how there are prophet brutes and how there are minor and major jackals and how there are minor and major grunts that do different things, but they're all the same species in a way as far as Halo is concerned. They just do different tactics. So for instance, I have here the Mauler. The Mauler has health 2, does harm 1 and close. Its moves are Become a Whirling Dervish, Cleave in Twain, and Feel No Fear. Variants, in each sort of adversary stat block, I put the word variant next to what the variants can adjust. So if the variants alter a specific move, you will see something like Become a Whirling Dervish, and then a little parentheses variant. And it means if you pick a variant, it replaces this move. So for the Mauler, in this case, its variants are on both health and harm. There's a Heavy Mauler, which gets +1 health and +1 harm. So in that case, it's 3 health, 2 harm, close. There's a Daredevil that can now do its 1 harm at near distance instead of close distance. And then there's the Chain Ripper, which is harm 3 close at that point. So this is like this dude that's like wielding a giant like chainsaw greatsword or something to that effect. And so that's sort of the direction I'm taking with like basic enemies, but that's not the only thing I'm playing with. I have also this is more, this is kind of pushing into the lunar cultists, which are a little bit more mystical, and this might be also where the corvids sit as well. Some enemy types don't have anything additional. They don't have any special rules or variants. They are just what they are. Some adversaries are going to have particular keywords, because again, I'm thinking like Legends of Runeterra, Magic the Gathering, how there are these evergreen keywords like First Strike, Flying. In Legends of Runeterra, it might be something like Barrier or Lurk as the new set's coming out. And so I have for the Umbral Prophet. The Umbral Prophet is a health 3, 0 harm adversary. Its moves are Foretell a Near Future, Invoke the Dusk, and Incite Fervor. And it has an aura that is reduce other lunar faction harm by 1. So anytime you would try to, as long as this thing is present in your current encounter, other lunar faction members receive less harm. They have some sort of like mystical barrier about them. Another example of this that I've been playing with is the Moonstone Paladin. Health 3, harm 1 and close. Its moves are deflect fire, intercept harm, strike with holy might, but it has a special rule that's aura, reduce sun by 1. So as long as this thing is present, because it's cloaked in moonstone armor, it is having a weakening effect on all the other sparks that are present because their energies are coming from the sun. So it's reducing their sun stat by 1 to a minimum of 1. I never want anyone to roll 0 dice without other complications. But that's an additional direction for things that I'm taking. Another example, really the lunar cultists have sort of like the more special abilities and less variance about them. Another example is the Umbral Stalker. Umbral Stalker is 1 health, but it deals 3 harm if it gets close to you. Its moves are Disappear, Shadow Shift, and Warp from Shadow. And it has a special move called Wound. So a special trigger called Wound. So if it hits or deals harm to something, it will deactivate your first mod slot, your mod slot 1, until the end of combat.
Awesome. That's so cool. I mean, there's a lot to dive into what you've gone through here, but again, I'm seeing when we were first talking, you were talking about like the Halo AI. I remember us talking about that,
Mm-hmm.
and that is something that I remember hearing about a long time ago. That like they were lauded for their like the cool way that grunts would behave differently in the presence of an elite, and we wanted some
Mm-hmm.
semblance of that being captured in the adversaries here, so that if X is here, then these adversaries will behave slightly differently, or they have access to things that they didn't have access to before. So not only do you have that captured in some of these cool like special rules, like some of those lunar cultists one you're describing, but also then the variants of these creatures to show that you don't necessarily need 100 adversaries in the book to have like all the possible enemies that a GM would actually want to use, but by just tinkering with small things like adding a couple variants to something, it will greatly change the way a particular adversary behaves in combat. And again, I think we're capturing some
Mm-hmm.
of this idea of like Magic the Gathering, because I feel like we're capturing some of these play styles of decks in the factions themselves. Because like the lunar cultist faction is all about these special rules and everything like that, while the raiders are all about maybe just like overwhelming you with variants of different types of enemies and stuff like that. And those are kind of capturing different play styles of decks that one might experience. So there's this clear thread that goes through the way that you think about things, which I think is really, which is neat, because then there's consistency, there's a clear
Mm-hmm.
method to the madness as you are designing these things, because they all come from these similar philosophies or ways that you're thinking about things. And
Yeah. Uh,
oh, go ahead.
no, you go ahead.
I
This
just
is your
want
show.
I was just gonna say I'm so excited to see what you do with the Corvids. I'm especially excited the fact that you are you're you're going back into the Corvid court disc document and finding things there, because that's awesome. The Corvid court will always hold a special place in my heart. So if there are ways to make that manifest Into Nova, I'm not gonna fight you on that one bit.
Think of it as your game's personal Easter egg.
Exactly.
Um, in addition to all the stuff that I've also talked about, you talked about capturing that AI of when what does it look like when a leader is present amongst any of these enemies? And so this takes the form of an elite type of enemy in the game. Um, so I have two elites structured up right now. One of them is a little more crazy but less mechanically intensive. The other is a little less crazy but more mechanically intensive. And again, these are things that you can sort of push and pull in. I guess it's really just I'm giving you advice on how to like craft your own elites too, in a way. So in addition to health and harm and moves, and there is one elite who has variants, but the thing that elites get is leadership. And so leadership will affect particular enemy types. And what I was thinking about was basically Warframe or Halo bosses that sort of change the scope of what you've been dealing with throughout the game. They have enemies act in a very specific way because that's how the battle is programmed by the game developers. And so, like for the Raiders, I have Caro the Bloodied. Caro the Bloodied has 10 health, harm 3, near, and splash. Splash is a new keyword that'll be attached to some, not all, because this is a very powerful ability. But whenever Caro would deal harm to a spark, it would deal 1 additional damage to every other spark who is near that spark. So basically, it's kind of like an AoE sort style of harm. And my imagination for Caro is like, Caro is just this like sort of ambiguous looking tough individual who has both a Gatling gun and a flamethrower in their hands, and then just go into town on it. And so Caro's moves are Unleash Hell, Intimidate, and Show No Mercy. And then the leadership abilities gives Caro an aura. All other Raider faction members gain +1 harm to whatever variation you give them, making them highly aggressive and highly dangerous. For the Raider faction, I will very rarely give them range, like the far tag. They almost in some way have to get close to you, and I feel like that is a trade-off for having height harm. And they also have relatively low health in comparison to their harm. So they're just like walking grenades, essentially. The other things attached to leadership are the Mauler enemy types approach twice as fast. So I don't know what that might look like mechanically, but narratively, it's just like they're just popping out from like behind crates, from behind barrels, from behind trees. Like they are getting in your face way faster than you're used to dealing with them. And then the last one there's a Raider enemy type called a Torch. So torches gain oil, causing fire to linger, dealing 1 additional harm on the next spark action. So the next time a spark takes an action, it'll take some burn damage as well. And that's about as mechanically deep I want to get with the game as far as like a boss entity is concerned. And this next elite is specifically for Eddie. The more sparks you make, Eddie, the more powerful this thing becomes. So this elite is called Umbra Corrupted Spark. It's basically the idea that the lunar cultists have captures a living spark, and they just jam it full of lunar stones, like just pierce its body and kind of take it under control of this lunar entity that they respect, giving like some lore implications, like, ooh, maybe there is a moon deity that is real or possessive or something like that. So the Umbra Corrupted Spark has health 10 and harm 2 and near. So it's kind of like this mid-range fighter. But its moves are Mimic a Spark variant, Wield a Strange Power, and Reveal a Twisted Mortality. And then the variants I've attached to it for now, so long as Eddie doesn't keep making sparks, is there's Grim, which changes the Mimic a Spark move into Dredge Up Nightmares. There is Pox or Plague. I know that you have a Pox frame coming, but This one's weaken indiscriminately, and then Sunslinger, raise the land. That's an Raze, raise the land. And then this spark also has 2 leadership abilities. Lunar Prophets will be able to heal this unit, and then Lunar Cultists will block harm for this unit, because it's the idea that they're trying to protect this conduit or manifestation of their deity and have it sort of spread its influence throughout the land. So that's sort of the take I have on elite/boss opponents in Nova.
I think that's super cool. What I like about it is that it adds a layer or two to differentiate the elites from the other enemies without necessarily adding on a huge amount of mechanical complexity that requires like a whole other way of thinking about playing a battle. Like the GM turn still follows the same sort of premises as it did before. Look to the moves of the adversaries that you're using. You'll activate them during your turn, GM's turn. But now there are some interesting interactions that can take place because of the way that these elites function when they are amongst adversaries that are part of their faction and everything like that. Which is just super cool that like, and again, reiterating what we've talked about earlier, like these are all tools in a toolkit, and the GM can play with them the way that they want to play with them. Like none of this is prescriptive, but it is an opportunity for you. Like these sparks are gonna get really powerful. They already are really powerful, and like after a few missions, you might not want to use this elite right away, but instead just be like, all right, let's throw this wrench in their plans. They think that they've faced everything that the Dusk has to show for itself, but what about this? And then you throw one of these
Mm-hmm.
elites in, and it forces them to change the way they play the game, which is always the way that I've thought about trying to run Lumen games, which is combat isn't about defeating the player characters, it's about changing the way that they are approaching combat on a round by round basis. Uh, or,
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily at that degree, but like every fight requires them to do more than just I use this power to murder everything. I use this power to murder everything. And these elites allow
Yeah,
you to
yeah.
do that. And he's got some cool things here, like
Uh,
love the mitigation rather than overpowering aspect, and that there's no power creep here, but
mm-hmm.
more like diminishing than rather like overtaking you. I think that's exactly it. Like you're approaching the way that I like to think about Lumen games with these elite bosses in a really cool way.
Yay, we did it. Um, yeah, I really didn't want like that's why the elites are the only ones that sort of do this either like harm buffing or group harm buffing, right? I know that I mentioned a adversary type earlier that increases its harm by having a variant type, but it also doesn't change its health. And I know that sparks are particularly powerful in this game. There's a lot of player agency in like how much harm a spark can do to multiple enemies at any one time with their powers. So what I was kind of looking at is I don't really want to change the harm health game too much. What I more want to affect is like the dice pool stuff at the end of the day. Silencing mods, silencing powers, reducing dice pool sizes, because those are things that determine success and failure at the end of the day, not how much harm you're dishing out. So, and for the elite/average enemies, like I know that you could put 3 maulers in a room and there's a good chance a single spark could wipe them all out in one go, and that's perfectly okay. Um, I think what even becomes more interesting is we've talked a lot about these factions in a vacuum, like you're facing either a lunar cultist or a raider. But what happens when you start mixing faction types, when they're dealing with each other out in the wild? What did those fights look like? Because those were also things in like Halo 3 and Halo 4, and also in Warframe. You had to deal with different combinations of faction types that changed the way that you would prepare for something or engage with enemies. Because I know that a lot of this game is also about the preparation beforehand. So Another thing that we talked about, especially with like ruin or mission generation, is that initially we talked about keywords, but I think I've kind of fallen away from keywords. More or less, maybe whenever you would get your Voyager reports and your GM would present missions to you and their difficulty, you might learn exactly like what enemy types might be here. And the more dangerous an area or the more unknown a sector is, you may get like some question marks. Like, yeah, you will be facing troopers and maulers and question mark, question mark, question mark. There's going to be 5 enemy types here. You don't know what the other 3 are. So it creates this air of like, okay, we can prep for these, but we're really fucked if the Corvid are here. Like we're like the way that we're preparing for the lunar cultists and the maulers, but we're not ready if there are any Corvid enemies present. And that's on, that's on the GM's prerogative to like last minute switch that or to have that like locked in and prepped. I would strive for the latter just in case the sparks get lucky, which could be cool. Makes them feel good. But yeah, I think it's about this sort of like, because here's the thing, I have currently in the raiders, I only have 4 raider enemies, but each raider enemy has about 3 variants, so that's 12 enemies that all play differently together and that interact in different ways, or that can cause a particular challenge to the unprepared spark. And you can start like, you can pepper those in as the GM, like, oh, okay, they are all pyre frames. They're all relying really heavily on their sun component, right? Cool. I'm going to put like 2 Moonstone Paladins in this fight, and their sun is reduced. Because here's the thing is that at current, effects aren't unique. So if there are multiple Moonstone Paladins in a fight, your sun is being reduced by 2. That's already a bigger problem than 1. I would limit it to like 3 at a maximum on the toughest, but that's just me. But yeah, if it's again, it's up to the GM at the table to be like, okay, well, I want this to be a unique thing. I don't want to like really stack up the odds against the players in this way. So yeah, very, very options, toolkits, as we've been discussing the whole time.
So we've just about hit an hour here of talking, which is usually where we like hit our we're gonna wrap it up phase. And Alex just said in chat, Jeremy, hearing the way you describe these missions and analogies makes me really excited for Nova, and I echo that sentiment so much. Like, I truly can't wait for this stuff to exist so that I can run Nova again and run it with with your tools rather than me like scratching out like I don't know like a crow monster attacks them here and then figure out the crow monster when I get to it. Like I'm so excited. I'm really I'm excited to have you on the project. I love the way that you think about games and stories, and it's clearly paying off already in some of this cool stuff that we're hearing about. So you all are going to see more about this, as it gets developed, and we'll kind of share things as it comes. But yes, Jeremy is here to bring in the very cool, GM toolkit here to Nova that will really lift the game into an amazing place. I'm very excited. So, oh, and Eddie's saying as a non-RPG player, makes sense. So there we go. And is very excited. We got to get Eddie to play Nova. That's my goal, is to get Eddie to play Nova ASAP.
Eddie, Nova time.
Wonderful. Well, Jeremy, why don't you go ahead and shout yourself out again? Where can people find you and all that as we wrap ourselves up here?
Yeah, once again, I am Jeremy Gage. You can chat with me over on Twitter at JeremyGage5. You can listen to the Draw Your Dice podcast, where Spencer has been a guest a couple of times now, soon probably a 3rd time, as Nova comes to a wrap. And you can also check out the Tabletop Call-In Show with me and Adam Bell. We have a cool new format thing that we're working on, so I hope that you'll enjoy this new show that we're working on. And then, yeah, that's it. That's about it.
Wonderful.
Oh, and this is the last 2 days for the DYD Q1 bundle also.
Oh, wow, it is the last 2 days.
Yeah, okay. Which has not been getting strong marketing, and I apologize.
Go check that out. It's a slew of awesome games. I'm a little biased because I've been the bundle, but it's all the fantastic Q1 guests from Jeremy's podcast. So check it out. I'm Spencer. You probably know me. I'm Gila RPGs Online. We will be doing more of these streams throughout the rest of the week, same time as today. I don't know if I'm going to have guests on them necessarily, but we've got some cool stuff coming up with tomorrow. We're going to do some design work. We're going to talk about some of these sparks that we haven't had a chance to see too much of, especially the ones that are outside of the quick start, and talking a little bit about what like mods in the Flare mod system looks like. Thursday, I want to just shout out a bunch of Lumen games. So Nova's a Lumen game, so it won't be heavily Nova related, but we're going to just talk about all the cool Lumen stuff that's out there. Friday, we'll talk about some of the stuff that Jeremy and I talked about today, which is the future of Nova, like just kind of ideating and brainstorming, like what could we do with this? I've already talked with some folks who have like really cool ideas. And actually, you and I have talked about one with like base building and like the
Hmm.
NPCs and like oh I really want to do that one. So we gotta do that. And then Saturday is like the final day of the campaign. The last thing to announce is if we hit 666 backers before the end of the campaign, we're getting the Devil Spark, which just looks incredible. Let me just like find the Devil Spark real quick. I've got it.
Put it up. Put it up.
I've tweeted about it recently enough. Yes, look at it. Look upon the Devil Spark. So yes, we got to get this Devil Spark. It's gonna be great. We are less than 100 away. So that's it, everybody. That's all from me. Thank you all so much for joining us. I'll throw this VOD up on Twitch and YouTube if you didn't get to see the whole thing, and I'll see you all later. Bye.